So we all know Lexus has not been the first manufacturer that comes to mind when we think of the word cool. Now behind me is the all-new 2024 Lexus GX 550, and it changes the script just a little bit. The GX makes me feel something when I look at it. This is a cool vehicle, but it has to compromise. This category of vehicle has no choice but to compromise because it's pulling from two completely opposite ends of driving. Over here, you have off-roading, something a lot of people never get to experience in their lives. And over here, you have luxury, the same thing. We're off to a rough start. All right, so ultimately, it needs to marry those two sides of the spectrum. After all, it's a Lexus. That's what Lexus is known for, a smooth driving experience, something not just one, but like 10 steps above the Toyota brand, right? The GX 550 nails it in that regard. First impressions, you jump on the inside. Even though this is a body-on-frame SUV, it's a large SUV, it's got a ton of ground clearance, about 8.9 inches. It rides really well for a body-on-frame SUV. The few days I've been driving it so far, it's not quite as jarring as a traditional pickup truck, which does nothing in order to kind of mask those like spine-crushing moments. The GX 550 just irons out a lot of those big bumps when compared to some of those other trucks. Now, compared to something like a Raptor, this doesn't have nearly the pitch and dive, although, yeah, when we sway it side to side here, there is a ton of body roll. Under the hood, 3.4 liter twin turbo V6 with a 10-speed automatic transmission. It's putting out 349 horsepower and 479 pound-feet of torque. Huge increase in numbers to the previous generation. Of course, the V8 is gone. And if your worry was, hey, the turbos aren't going to spool up in time, I'm not going to have the low-down torque that I want, just one look at the tach will tell you otherwise. It redlines at 5,800 RPM. So that just tells you, yeah, the torque has to come in somewhere, and it's low down, I believe, 3,000 RPM peak torque. Super smooth. I mean, it is, even just in normal driving mode here, we have Eco, Normal, and Sport, it is eager to get going. It's got great throttle response, really smooth shifts. Now, you can use the paddle shifters. I tend to just leave it in automatic and let it do its thing. That's the luxury coming through there. It's quiet in here. It rides smooth. There's wind noise. We are in a box. In sport mode, we do get a little bit of artificial noise coming through. So one of the areas where I've fallen in love with the GX a little bit is just how it feels and how, yeah, like I mentioned, it masks some of the bumps in the road compared to pickup trucks, but everything else, like the vibration of the engine is felt through the steering wheel. Even these bumps here, you know, I'm getting feedback through the steering, even though, I mean, this is no Lotus, this is no McLaren as far as steering feedback goes. We all know that, we're not expecting that, but at the same time, like, give it a little bit of throttle, it shifts down, all of that comes through the steering. And that's, yes, a characteristic of just a body-on-frame SUV like this, a heavy, capable, and rigid vehicle. What I'm trying to say is it's refined and it's smooth, yet it's still connected, which is a great first sign, even just here on the street, which we all know this is where 99% of GX 550 buyers are going to be driving. I mean, so much torque, just plenty enough torque, more than you'll ever need. No boost noises, a distinct lack of boost noises. I feel like that's a huge missed opportunity. Brake pedal feels amazing. There is so little travel, but it's so firm. It is the polar opposite end of mush here. It's really good. So much confidence, which I was not expecting. At low speed, steering becomes super light. really like Lexus light. That's when you forget, those moments is when you forget you're driving a truck. But then when you get up to speed, if you put it in sport mode, which I've just been leaving it on because it doesn't get too twitchy, but the steering weights up a good amount at speed, but still light, just smooth. It's easy to drive, really easy to drive. God, the view out of the hood is one of my favorite things about this truck. Oh yeah, there's some there's some understeer. Body roll, understeer, it's predictable. It's got sharp steering too, a quicker rack than I was expecting. You're never gonna forget this is a truck, a body on frame proper SUV, but I mean, as far as Lexus refinement goes, they've brought all they can to how it feels in the cab. And even on the freeway, I could see myself driving long drives in this thing. Visibility is great. Headroom is phenomenal. One thing I will say, these mirrors are slightly compromised. You know, this is easier to park than, let's say, a Yukon, something that's a little bit wider. But these mirrors aren't quite wide enough to really give me a good scope on my blind spot. Yeah, I have my blind spot detection, but shoulder checking, blind spot visibility is not the greatest, but everything else, all the rest of the visibility makes up for it. Digital gauge cluster is really easy to look at. I have it set up so I just have my my pitch and my roll on the left side, and then fuel economy on the right. I don't look at that because the GX 550 is terrible on fuel. It gets an average of 17 miles per gallon or 13.5 liters per 100 kilometers. Yeah, it's just as bad as the V8. If you're worried about fuel economy, get a Land Cruiser. We'll also get to the competition here in a second. So we are driving the luxury trim today. That means a few things, but first, standard features. What do we get? All GX 550s get radar cruise control. That's awesome. They all get heated and ventilated seats, front seats. They all get the LED headlights up there. And of course, they all get wireless charging. So the luxury trim gets these huge 22-inch wheels and all-season tires here. Whereas if you go with the Overtrail or Overtrail Plus, you get big knobby off-road tires. You get 18-inch wheels, a ton more tread. But most importantly, here in the luxury trim, what you don't get is Lexus's clever way of dealing with their anti-roll bars, their stabilization, right? So in the Land Cruiser, that's a button press. That's a manually adjustable, like in a traditional SUV kind of off-roading scenario, you disconnect your sway bars, great articulation there when you need it, and then connect them again when you want to get back on the street. Lexus has this trick system which it automatically sense when it needs to either disconnect or connect those anti-roll bars to varying degrees, right? This luxury trim doesn't get that. In addition to that, you don't get the adaptive suspension, which makes it a little bit more comfortable here on the street and off-road. So if you can't already tell, I love this thing. Really good on-road manners. But what is it like to drive? Why did they even change the GX's outward appearance so much? Was it just to cater to the people that, you know, have keen eyes for the G-Wagon but can't afford one? I think that's a little bit of it, but also it's plain cool. I've caught myself looking back at this so many times this week. Huge fenders up here, incredibly muscular, really wide fender flares. This new model is, yes, a little bit longer than the previous model. It's wider than the previous model. The wheelbase is longer, and not only that, but the articulation, super important in off-roading, has been increased for this model year. So hopefully this gives you guys a good sense of scale. I'm 5'9"-ish. It's a solid 2 inches taller than me. LED light bar across the back here. It looks very similar to the Land Cruiser, but different enough. Back here we also have, there's the button, the rear glass that opens up. This is huge. It does not have a swaying tailgate like the Land Rover Defender, but here this is super useful for just grabbing stuff in and out real quick, especially if you've got some brush hanging down, you're in a tight spot and you don't want to open the entire hatch. Standard also is that automatic hatch down here. The luxury trim is able to tow just shy of 8,000 pounds, whereas if you go over trail or over trail plus, you can tow 9,000 pounds. That's huge. That's more than a Defender, way more than a Land Cruiser, largely due to the fact that that has an inline-4 engine and more than a lot of the competition. A ton of storage space back here. Luxury trim gets 3 rows. The Over Trail and Over Trail Plus just get 2 rows. Then if you go Executive, which is effectively Luxury Plus, you get captain's chairs in the 2nd row. Also, one great thing that we have back here, in addition to the just enormous amount of space, there we go. Back here, we've got electronic folding 3rd row. Now, the 3rd row, it's there. You can use it. Now, would I for adults? Probably not. But if you need to, it's there. Of course, with the 3rd row up, not a ton of space back there. There's also a ton of room in the back seats. With the luxury trim, you get heated rear seats and a 60-40 split there, which is super handy. So the one we're driving today, yes, has the semi-aniline black leather on the inside here. It looks awesome. It's not distracting. We also have a 21 speaker Mark Levinson sound system in this one instead of the standard 10 speaker audio system. Sounds great, not quite up to the competition as far as some of the Bang & Olufsen systems that we've seen. Also, we do get leather seats, so massage seats. That's exactly what that means. Now, are these seats as good as, I don't know, something like the Volvo XC90 for around the same money? No, and that's where we see a little bit of that compromise between something that's a dedicated luxury unibody SUV and a body-on-frame truck that has a ton of off-road capability. I do have to say, the massage seats are great, some of the best, but however, if I'm in Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, wireless, which is standard as well, if I'm in that system here on the digital display, there is an infinite amount of button presses for me to get to my massage seat function. Really annoying. So some areas like that, the user interface is not quite there. It's not as optimized as it could be. These leather seats in the luxury trim also have a ton more controls, 10-way adjustable, however, only 2-way adjustable lumbar. Everything else is awesome. The materials are great. Everything's really nice to touch. I mean, expected build quality from Lexus here. We got some brush materials down here. And then, of course, we do have our center differential, our torsion center differential control here, which is standard on all models. However, the rear differential, the locking rear differential, is only optioned on the Overtrail and Overtrail Plus models. Drive mode select, we only have 3 drive modes here. Overtrail and Overtrail Plus get a lot of these other features that I wish we had here. It just doesn't give me as much confidence going off-road, and of course that begins with the wheel and tire setup, but it continues in here. We don't have a dedicated off-road or sand mode. Not only that, but it doesn't have hill descent control, and it doesn't have low-speed rock crawling control. So, and then we don't have any of the trail cameras. So we get a 360 cam, which is incredibly helpful, but we just don't get those extra trail cams. And for all I know, the extra cameras and additional skid plates the Overtrail gets could make or break your time off-road. More than anything, these options just speak volumes to the vast array of scenarios the GX can call home. I just love the idea of getting a massage while there's like a muddy apocalypse happening outside that I'm somewhat oblivious to. Most vehicles that blend these two worlds this well cost double what the GX does. Combine that with physical buttons for drive modes and everything chassis related, what I'm left with is a no friction experience. The GX 550 starts at $83,000 Canadian, and this one we drove today comes in at $105,000 Canadian. When you're comparing this to the Land Cruiser, which I'm sure you guys have watched a ton of videos on these two vehicles so far, the climate control here is all digital versus the Land Cruiser has a ton of physical buttons, which to me, if you're in an off-roading scenario, those physical buttons could be a huge asset. Whereas here, I could see the digital climate control buttons, which aren't always displayed, especially if you have Android Auto or Apple CarPlay up, or if you're changing some settings. It could be a little bit distracting if you're off-roading, but that's a minor thing. All right, so what have we learned? Well, First off, we've learned that the GX 550 is indeed very cool. The way this truck makes me feel is good, and I think that's ultimately what the GX 550 as a statement comes down to. Now, as far as off-road capability goes and an overall daily driver, what would I do? So this luxury trim, as we found out, is just not as capable as the Overtrail and Overtrail Plus. Now, when I'm talking about a $100,000 SUV that doesn't quite have the ride quality that some unibody SUVs would have, you kind of have to ask yourself, how often am I going to be off-roading? You know, this is the Vancouver spec, right? This is the LA spec. So what would I do? If I was gonna get a GX 550, I would go Overtrail, skip the leather, skip the massage seats, skip the rear sunshades, stuff like that, in order to just have a little bit more confidence off-road, but still have like just the essence of a Lexus, which is a very refined, smooth driving, quiet daily driver, which all GX 550s are. Now, as far as the competition goes, yeah, if you're dedicated, you want to go off-roading a lot more often than most, then yeah, the Ford Bronco, Everglades, approach and departure angles, even the Land Cruiser has better approach and departure angles than this. And of course, the Land Rover Defender, yes, not quite a body-on-frame SUV. They have a monocoque that's, they say, is a lot more rigid than a lot of body-on-frame vehicles. That's a whole other tangent. Ultimately, what it's done though is combine luxury and off-roading seamlessly, and that's what it set out to do. I cannot fault it for that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm gonna miss this thing. God, GX, Lexus, you did it. See you guys next time.